Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. This episode was made possible by a sponsorship from Syneos Health. For more information, visit syneoshealth.com. In this episode, Taryn Grome, co-founder and editor-in-chief at PharmaVoice, meets with Marie Lamont, general manager, Inteliquet, an IQVIA company.
Marie, welcome to the WOW podcast program.
Thank you very much. I'm super happy to be participating.
Excellent. Marie, please tell us a little bit about your journey, which has led you to your current role as general manager at Inteliquet.
Sure. I've had an intriguing career pathway. I originally started in finance, and as my career developed, realized the need was more on bridging operational activity. And that really came together at Genzyme, in the international group at Genzyme. This included working with business models for each country, supply chain, reimbursement, pricing, and patient or customer service. And I quickly went from just thinking about finance and strategy to how do we execute on businesses, what made sense in a particular market. Back then, I use the term back then because it was a while ago, Genzyme was in a place where we needed to make a lot of choices globally, very, very focused on rare diseases. And in many cases, in markets, the need was not manifest. And in that situation, it did not make sense to bring a therapeutic solution into a market who was not yet able to understand their rare population and how to help manage the patient's diseases. The company at that time, we really chose to focus on disease awareness and education to make sure the patients were understood and ensure a care model was established, right? That ability to broadly care for their patients first, because providing a therapeutic doesn't make a difference if they don't know how to care for the patients. And I think that's endemic for any of us. They sometimes call us Henry kids, right? Those of us who grew up under Henry Jameer learned how important it was to put the patients at the front of the dialogue and the front of any conversation. I really had the luxury of working underneath Henry and a lot of other leaders at Genzyme, but it also meant I had the luxury of being involved in global pricing, and working with market access, working with the supply chain. How do you develop a business model in these markets, which meant I had a chance to touch everything. Funny enough, I found using insights discovery, which is derived a little bit off the Myers-Briggs, and strength finders, that connectedness happens to be one of my key strengths. It means I see the interconnections amongst people and functions and groups and information, and being able to drive decisions based on those interconnections. For me, it means building bridges amongst islands. It helps bringing cures and therapies to patients. It allowed me to see big picture. How do we manage and grow in healthcare and biopharma around the globe while helping markets, patients, treaters? Interestingly enough, with the transaction with Sanofi, I took an integration role that took me away from that patient touch world. And I did it because they needed somebody who could manage change, not because I was an expert in that particular area, which I absolutely was not. But it set me up to step into a role within the rare disease group after that and do global business strategy and commercial operations and the humanitarian programs, which brought me back to that patient focus, which is very important to me. You don't see a lot of folks with a finance background that actually have an opportunity to really engage in a place where you can impact patients. And, it makes me really emotional. I was lucky to meet patients in Brazil, in Mexico, in Russia, in Japan, in South Korea. Knowing that you are doing something to help gives you a purpose that goes beyond just a job. Knowing that you're working in healthcare, but it's a way to impact differently. And that's what led me through Doman, Life Science Services, and over into Inteliquet. Long, odd journey, but fun.
Wow, I love how you called yourself one of Henry's kids. I think that had to be one of the most, like, what a unique opportunity to work with one of the giants in the industry and just to be so inspired by all of his vision. So, wow, I'm quite envious. And I love how you put it that you are building bridges among the islands and trying to figure out that interconnectedness, all to the benefit of patients. And you have been working in that rare disease space for quite some time, in various different aspects for much of your career. So tell me, why rare disease? What was the draw?
It's interesting. Rare disease did not at that time have enough of a voice. The small patient populations globally, and this is pre-global genes, pre-Nord, right? There wasn't a voice. And I think that creating a voice became very important. Trying to provide a venue where patients are the primary focus, not the bottom line, was also a focus. Back then, there was also the US policy to encourage finding options for patients where there wasn't an economic incentive to make the enormous investments necessary to discover cures. That's not the driver of change, but that provided a place where rare disease investments could start to succeed. I think the focus is due to patients and caregivers, the advocacy organizations, biopharma learning that rare disease can be a successful business model, accelerating the use of EMRs for more than billing. Back in the day, EMRs were put in place just for billing. Now they collect health outcomes, which can be used to support patient diagnosis, right? The genetic testing and genomics and improvements in clinical trials all lead to improving the world for rare patients, but also rare oncology and other disease areas. The evolution of genomics, rare really made an impact. It's not to say that oncology didn't as well, but in rare disease, it really did. Taking a look at the genotyping and phenotyping. How did you determine if somebody was a Niemann-Pick patient or a Gaucher patient? You needed to spend that time investing in genomics. 15 to 20 years ago, such limited data. There's so much more data available now that supports that scientific and the patient needs, patient-reported outcomes, that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. All of that supports the therapeutic development of treatment for these small patient populations. I think we can find the patients now because there's better understanding, better access to genetic data, but honestly, because patients and their caregivers are such strong advocates for their care. It's not to say they weren't 15, 20 years ago, but there are so many associations and advocacy groups supporting their endeavors. I would also say clinical trials. They're the only way to get novel therapeutics into patients, but it's also one of the most frustrating things for physicians, researchers, patients, and in today's world, cancer patients. Broadly in the industry, we need patient diversity, site diversity, geographic diversity, clinical trials as a care option. Compassionate use was introduced with the rare disease patient population because that patient population pushed for it. They pushed to make it happen. They needed the options because the downside of not participating and receiving compassionate use was so horrid. Today, we're trying to really push seeing clinical trials as a care option. It's unfortunate that research directors and clinical sites have to choose between advancing clinical research and giving patients access to trials or compassionate product. And usually it's because of financial limitations. And I think that is entirely unfair when the patient populations need the most advanced science and trials to help them. So I take a look at what happened in rare and compassionate use and say, we need to create an upswell of activity to make sure trials are a care option. And I'm not saying all trials should be a care option, But something getting to phase 3 should probably be a care option if you can stop the progression of someone's disease. I don't think folks are shutting sites out. I don't think there is a conscious effort to say don't do trials as a care option. We just need to change the environment so it supports it. And it supports it for small community physician practices that may be caring for oncology patients or rare disease patients, but also large ones. In the industry, we need to support innovation because we should be learning all these lessons from the rare disease population and applying it to other disease states. That's something I'm fairly passionate about because we owe it to those patient populations.
Absolutely. What has to change to make clinical trials a care option far more prevalent in today's?
There's probably a large list, but I'll talk about a couple of the things I think need to happen. The clinical trial process is challenging, and COVID showed us that. We need to adopt more patient-reported outcomes, patient-mediated data collection. We need to adopt more decentralized clinical trial options. That will help with the diversity that we need to see happen. But I also think that larger trial sites and academic medical centers, while they have financial challenges, they don't experience the challenges in quite the same way small community practices do. And I think we have to find technology and process improvements that can help those smaller sites. How do you figure out what can you do to help them automate their work? They've got all these little steps and nuanced judgment calls that they have based on their experience. How do you build process and technology around that? And how do you do that work so that you can help support them? I'm not a fan of technology solving everyone's problem. It can't do all things for all people, but companies should be super clear about how they can help. Because if we provide the venue where trials can occur more broadly geographically for distributed populations around the world, then they can be provided as a care option to patients. I think during the pandemic, Inteliquet focused on how could we help healthcare organizations, and for us very specifically cancer centers, automate some of their work. So we took a dive into what do they do manually so that we could learn faster how to accelerate our platform. The pandemic made trials very hard to continue. So many started much later than anticipated, delayed their start, postponed starts, canceled starts, and paused trials. That impacted the financial results, not just of biopharma, but also healthcare. So how do you mitigate the inherent tragedy of trials being delayed or stalled? There's nothing like putting a system under stress to figure out what works and what matters most. We found with us trying to do more automation, improve the workload for some of the trials, they were able to enroll, a 200% increase on patients during the pandemic. But it meant us all working together as partners, using real-world data aggregation, AI, and other technologies to try and pull that together. What did that do? It helped improve patients' access to the trials and to the drugs that might actually stop the progression of their disease. It helped move sites along in their research goals and engage in better standard of care for patients. I think the more any of us can do to help reduce administrative burden with process and tech, that helps the economic challenges that sites face, and it means more patients can get more access to trials as an option.
Fascinating. So tell me, through the pandemic and you went into those sites and you applied that technology, what are some of the key learnings you found? What were some of those processes that you were able to automate that folks were doing manually, for instance?
A little bit of what Inteliquet does is help cancer centers do better feasibility assessment, better understand their patient population, so they can more quickly say go or no go on studies. Nobody wants to open up and spend the work to start a trial that they will never have a hope of enrolling patients on. It's an opportunity cost of money, and for small cancer centers, it's a complete waste of their time. They want to be putting their effort into something that really will make a difference for their patients. So the things that our technology does is use machine learning and AI to ingest clinically relevant healthcare data. So working with sites to better understand their data flows, their workflows. How can we improve our biomarker ingestion so that the sites can quickly slice and dice their patient population data to make some quick decisions? It might mean helping a site do pre-screening. If somebody had to move their clinical research coordinator into frontline patient-facing activity during the pandemic, we actually took some of our staff and said, do you need our help in pre-screening? We'll help. You tell us how we can help, we'll go and help you do it. I would say we also took a look at how can we do more and better cloud support for some of the sites, because it's a reduction in cost for them. Simple and easy for us, big impact for them. I'd say it's a lot of small Kaizen activity, because you're always looking for large leap forwards and also small incremental improvements. And I think that's what we focused on during the pandemic.
Fantastic. Really fascinating stuff. You've obviously been very successful over your career in building some pretty high performing teams. What are some of your keys to success? And then as a follow-up, what are those qualities that you believe make up for a high performing team?
Oof, okay. Well, I'm going to draw a connection with networking and what we've learned about changing processes in healthcare organizations. When you make changes from within an organization, whether they're for the better or not, it involves bringing people and evolving them from seeing one way of doing things, one path as their reality, to seeing multiple potential paths in reality. And that means working with those teams and individuals to understand that the friction that exists with change, whether it's adopting a new pathway, adopting a new manual process, or using software to replace a process, means helping them understand friction is not conflict. I'll jump back and think about Genzyme for a minute. They really, and Henry focused on creative tension, and that his matrix structure was about creating that good tension to engender unique ways of thinking of things and entrepreneurship versus conflict. I'd say that's one of the key components when you think about building a high-performing team. Can your team leaders embrace friction as constructive conflict? Can they see it as constructive, right? Versus something that will create a fight. To me, that's one of the biggest triggers. If something is going to allow people to fight with one another, that means it's not working. The best leaders at organizations find and nurture cross-functional alliances. They network themselves internally, and those cross-functional alliances allow them to make change and do it better. Change is super uncomfortable. And if it's not, did you change everything you actually need to? It's going to create anxiety and uncertainty. But if you create a path forward, encourage your team to step outside of their comfort zone, stretch their abilities, see this discomfort as a pathway for growth. Now you're talking about people who are going to embrace that highly functioning leadership team. Networking inside and outside your org is vital. You must network with people who do things different than you do. If I only connected myself with people who think like me, my world would be really small and I wouldn't affect change. So I think, and I encourage my teams to go out and interact with others who are unlike you, who introduce new ways of thinking. I think you need to win support as a leader, both from your team and your peers or your investors or your board, your executive leadership team, wherever you sit, being able to present a different way of doing things and win support means having those cross-functional alliances help support that. You can bounce ideas against people. They can help you with those alternate ways of thinking. It allows you to bring a better reality to take shape. And as a good leader, you introduce that way of working to your teams. So, I talk a lot about networking. When Sanofi acquired Genzyme, they talked about socializing. It's the same thing. You're socializing yourself and your ideas and your growth through internal and external networks. I think it means you develop an appetite to reach out to folks that are different than you and make connections with them. The last thing I'd say is when I'm working with the leadership team, I'm encouraging them to pay attention to what people are saying about their passions and drivers behind their back. Sometimes they may think those passions are limiting or that you're not well-rounded, but my team members, if they understand their passions, embrace them, and base their connections with other on exploring their passions and valuing their passions, you end up in such a better place and a much more productive and highly functioning team. And I would say that's not just within companies, it's within nonprofits, boards I've sat on with nonprofits. It's the same thing. If you can motivate people and bring them forward and have them embrace evolution and change and network outside of their comfort zone, you can make anything successful.
It's fascinating, Marie. And what are some of those qualities you look for when you go to handpick a team member? Obviously, you don't want them to think exactly like you. You're looking for that diversity of thought and perspectives. But what are some of those other things those intangibles maybe?
If I had the luxury, I'd be using Discovery Insights to hire all my people because I'd make sure they do everything on a color coding. I'd make sure I have people who are rounding the team out. Now, you don't always have that luxury, but I do look for that. I don't want everybody who's red or blue or green on my team. I want that blending. I also look for folks that want to be here. I'm really transparent when I hire people about the biggest challenges we're facing and the biggest opportunities. I want them to want those challenges and opportunities. So I look for that. I look for open-mindedness. I look for folks who are comfortable embracing change, even if they don't like it. But honestly, I also hire people who are smarter than I am because they're going to have great ideas that I won't have thought about. So, I think those are the basics of what I look for.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to say you missed us yellows in your color wheel there.
I love the wooers.
Being a yellow, I'm just saying.
Yep, I agree.
What advice can you share with other women who may want to reach that executive level? What steps should they take to give themselves the best advantage?
Career journeys are often serendipitous, and it is a blend of planning and being open to opportunities. That you have to do both, right? You can plan your career path, but if you're not being open to the opportunities that are coming your way, you might miss that next best, greatest thing that's coming your way. I work with often very scientific and technical folks. And planning isn't the hard part. It's the having the opportunities, which can be harder for them because networking, despite being what we call a soft skill, is harder than expected for that particular community. And helping teach people that networking is not fake, that it can be purposeful is really important. Helping them understand the value, because frequently networking is just creating awareness with someone else that you are around and that you have a skill set and experience that they may find valuable at a later time. And, between you and me, I know you have tremendous experience with this yourself, Taryn. And at some point, I think we should have you chat a little bit about it. I've been lucky enough to interact with you a couple times at the WBL and HBA and at the Red Jacket events. Networking is so important for folks. And so I say to women scientists, women business leaders, even women who are in manufacturing and engineering, you got to get out there and network. And so one of the things I've been doing for, oh gosh, probably the last 10 years is leading workshops on networking, especially for women in science and technology, teaching them that their title is not who they are. So a woman could be a bench scientist, but that's not who they are. Who they are could be an entrepreneur that happens to be a bench scientist. And so I think teaching them that mindset, similar to research directors at healthcare orgs. These women are often ridiculously smart, intelligent professionals who find themselves in an unexpectedly challenging place. They may be driven and they want to network, but the effort is really draining. And many of them are introverts, and it can bankrupt them in terms of their energy and confidence. So how do we help them expand and grow and teach them? How do you take a networking event that you're dreading and turn it into something where you just set yourself 2 goals? I want to meet 2 people and I want to have this conversation. And if you achieve those goals, it's been a success.
I say that it's so smart to set those small goals, because it can be very intimidating for people, as you say, who are introverts, who are not comfortable in those kinds of large social settings or those big kind of arenas. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. Keep going. I know you had another
No, you're right. And I think that when some of the clinical research directors and heads of cancer centers are in the same place, right? So we will look at their workflow to help identify kind of choke points and starting points to unlock potential. I say the same thing to the women in networking. Bite-sized chunks, develop mastery, get comfortable where you draw more energy from your networking instead of being drained. I was the keynote speaker at an event a couple years ago, and I brought capes because my message to people is you want to become a networking superhero. And for a lot of women, what happens is networking is kryptonite to them. So the goal is to change that mindset so that they actually get the energy and not be drained by it. And so, I really focus on how can you be a networking superhero? It is possible. Just take a process that makes you feel weaker and reverse it so that you grow from it instead. I think the more they seek it out, the more comfortable they are. And I suggest, especially to women scientists, there's the AWIS, Association of Women in Science. Go there, meet a person. You're going to talk to somebody who's similar to you. Get comfortable with that. Then jump outside of your comfort zone. Go somewhere else. Go to a conference. It's okay. You want to hear the panelists. You want to hear the platform, the abstracts and posters, but you also want to meet 2 people. And if you do that and feel good about it, then you'll do more.
Marie, I love that approach to networking. And I think sometimes networking gets that bad rap that it's just a business card exchange. And it's, but it's so much more. It's about relationship building. It's about building your own personal board of directors, if you will. It's about finding those people who can provide mentorship or even sponsorship sometimes in your career journey. So excellent advice there. Thank you so much for sharing. And then, because this is our WOW podcast program, I'm going to ask you to tell me about an accomplishment or a WOW moment that shaped or changed the trajectory of your career.
Oof, okay. So a WOW moment, leading a company through a global pandemic.
That is a WOW.
And working to facilitate a paradigm shift in healthcare at exactly the same time, right? So, we weren't just leading to grow the business, where we were leading to try and change the paradigm about how clinical trials occur. How do they occur in cancer and rare oncology specifically? So I think my career continues to shape right now, as you could say. I think it's interesting that wow moment forced us to say, and me, how do I provide flexibility in my org? Because we are a virtual company, but how do you provide flexibility to healthcare organizations so they can keep clinical research working? How do you advocate for the broader spectrum of changes in a pandemic environment? One of my big passions is moving in genetic testing earlier in the patient journey. And that is something I learned in rare as well as oncology. So while I'm growing the company, while I'm trying to facilitate the paradigm shift, I'm also running down the path of making sure we're trying to advance genetic testing earlier, which helps also clinical trials as a care option. So the wow moment meant we weren't thinking about our product. It meant we were thinking about how do you support the most immune compromised patients during a pandemic by helping the environment that surrounds them and their treating physicians. And in doing so, it makes your actions follow. It kind of goes back to that Henry Tremere mindset.
To say, full circle back to where you began
Yes.
with Tremere.
Yes.
So I love that that bookend of your thought process there. And certainly being patient forward has done you so well. And on behalf of patients, I can't thank you enough for all that you're doing to help move the science, help move clinical trials to a care option. I think that's a hot topic right now. And I am looking forward to what the future months and years hold in terms of that, because I think there are some challenges there, but I think it's going to be really a progressive step.
I absolutely agree. The variant issues around the pandemic continue, right? And all companies should be saying, how do we provide services and what do they look like from the patient perspective, from their treating physician perspective, from the environmental perspective? The story's not over. And I think the more all of us in healthcare keep the end game in mind, the better off we'll all be. And that end game, of course, is patients.
Mic drop. I cannot add anything to that. So thank you so much for your time today. It has been fascinating talking to you. I've learned so much, and I can't thank you enough.
Oh, thank you so much. This was great. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. And thanks again to Syneos Health for sponsoring this episode. For more information, visit syneoshealth.com. And don't forget to check out our other WOW podcast episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2021 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks LLC.